Okay, welcome back to the Are You Strong show. Man, I am jacked up about the guest that I'm about to introduce to you right now. Let me give you a little bit of a history of this young man, and I love to say young to anybody who's younger than me, right? But he's a Maryland Terp, graduated from University of Maryland, got his law degree from Washington College, which is phenomenal, but had a desire to be a football coach. Went on to coach at a very high level collegiately. He then took his talents to the XFL, the NFL, but what's really cool, he was also a head coach in the CFL, which is what's the best thing I love saying is he won their Super Bowl, their Grey Cup, up in the CFL. He's a best-selling author, and you have to read this book, The Crush It Formula. I read it myself, highly recommend it. Look at my stuff on LinkedIn. I posted my top 10 takeaways. It's a must read. He is now the CEO and certified performance coach of his own company, and I can't wait to get into it. Welcome to the show, Jaime Elizondo.
Jeff, thank you. I'm excited to be here, and I appreciate that introduction. And I'm going to have to hire you as my introduction when I do my keynote
Yeah,
speeches.
there you
So,
go. There you
yeah,
go. But I mean, I looked, your history is very well posted, and there's just so many things to I can keep listening and listening, but we'd be talking for another hour of all the all of your accolades, But welcome to the show, and Jamie, I have a ton of questions to ask you, but before I get into asking a bunch of stuff, can you just tell the audience just a little bit about yourself?
yeah. No, I appreciate that, and I'll keep it brief because I've always been a big believer that you'll get to know me as we go through the
Yeah.
show and the time. But I've been blessed, Jeff, to be able to do a lot of different things. Not only to get the law degree, like you mentioned, but to go into coaching and coaching has been at the heart of my really who I am since I was in my 12 and 13. I was coaching then. That's when I really started the coaching journey. I knew I wanted to coach football. I grew up in Texas, so Texas is a way of football is a way of life in
Everything's
Texas.
bigger in Texas.
Yeah, and it's just ingrained in you, right? And so, um, but for me, I've been blessed to be around some really awesome individuals, and that's to be around the likes of Tom Brady and Drew Brees in my journey, and to work for Mark Trestman as a head coach, Doug Marrone, Sean McDermott, those types of guys has been really a blessing for me. But um, I decided to leave the coaching industry in well, really a couple years back because I knew I wanted to impact individuals in a different way, and we'll get into that journey. But for
Yep.
me, a little bit about myself. I'm married. I have a wonderful 6-year-old daughter who is 6 going on 16,
Yeah.
and we call ourselves the Three Amigos. So I'm really excited to spend some time with you today, though.
Well, I'm glad to have you, and we're gonna bounce around a little bit, just to keep everybody kind of in tune. Hey, what's next?
Yeah, let's
But
do it.
you just mentioned that hey, you gave up coaching. I don't want to say you gave up, but you gave it up on the football side to come into your own personal coaching business. But let's go backwards. What motivated you to become a football coach?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, right, and I share the story because it's after my first year of law school, I had a girlfriend at the time, and she was the one that was the catalyst. So in my first year of law school, first year of law school is tough. You're grinding through long hours and days. And one point she just says to me, she turns to me and she says, "Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Sure." She goes, "Why don't you go coach football? Your face lights up when you talk about it, when you watch it, you're a different person." And she was really the catalyst that put me on the coaching journey. I knew I loved football. And I had been, and to make a long story short, I played tennis professionally. I played tennis at the University of Maryland because my football career came to an end in high school. I had an injury and I couldn't play a contact sport. So I ended up finding out that I was actually good in a different sport. And that's a unique combination. You don't
Yeah.
get many tennis players that are football coaches.
You don't find many football players that can play tennis either.
Well, that's true too. That's
Right?
exactly right. And so I started the journey, and make a long story short, when I was finishing my law degree, I had some great offers for some firms in DC, and I was starting at 150,000, and this was back in the early 2000s, or I could go make $12,500 coaching at William and Mary. And
And
so
everybody thought you were nuts.
everybody thought I was nuts, Jeff, including my parents. And
I'm
so,
sure.
but you have to follow what you truly are passionate about.
Mm.
And for me, I was blessed to work in a law firm and see what that lifestyle was going to look like. But I knew I wanted to impact uh, people on the football field through football, right, and change young men's lives through the game of football. And so that's where the journey started. I knew it was always in me, but it was a love for the game. It was a love for the players. It was a love for the ability to change people's lives.
So can you talk about that initial start? Like you just, hey, I was making 12 grand. But, I don't think the typical person understands the grind of a college coach or an
Mhm.
NFL coach. They just see the games, they see the TV, they see the glitz and glamour. Can you talk about, what it takes to become, a college and professional football coach?
Yeah, it's not an easy path.
Right.
And one of the things that you have to be willing to do is you have to be willing to sacrifice and deprive yourself of some of the other things that when in that age group during that time have. And it's you're in the office and especially if you want to climb, especially when you're young, you're in the office at 5, no later, right? And then you're working all the way through till 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. There's some nights where you might have 3 hours of sleep and you turn around and you're back in the office. And you might be doing that repeatedly for
Yeah.
14, 16, 18 weeks.
Yeah.
And I think it's also you've got to be humble early on. And you've got to be willing to do the stuff that other people aren't willing to do.
Yeah.
Right. And for example, after William and Mary, or excuse me, before I went to William and Mary, I was stuffing envelopes at the University of Maryland, my alma mater, just so I could be in the football department. And this was back in the old days, Jeff, where you're literally stuffing
Oh
envelopes,
yeah.
and
Getting paper
sending it.
cuts.
Yeah, paper cuts. I'd show up to law school, and my fingers were people. My classmates would go, "What are you doing?"
Yeah.
Like, and I said I was spending, 4 or 5 hours a day in the recruiting office just stuffing those envelopes, but it's worth it, and you have to be willing to do that, especially if you have a vision for yourself.
Yeah. Well, in your book, you talk about high performers, and well, here we go. We're going to bounce to your book, and
Mm-hmm.
and for this is going to be on YouTube. If anybody, this is Jamie's book. Here's how I read it, and you saw the video, right?
Yeah.
I am a somebody told me a long time ago, are you reading, or asked me a question, are you reading for entertainment or for education?
Mm,
And I started thinking, I don't really know. And so there's like, well, what do you get from the books? I'm like, I don't know. So I'm like, he's like, then you're reading for entertainment.
that's right.
He's like, here's how to fix it. So he's like, just start with the highlighter. So then I start with the highlighter, then I start with the tabs, and I'm like, what does this mean? And now I absorb the book and
Yeah.
and I educate myself, and now I use this. I'll be using this, and I can't wait to have you come in here for everybody who's listening. Jamie's going to come in and coach my team. Which is we're going to get into that, which is really I'm totally jacked up and excited over that. But how do you determine, or can you determine, like who has the high performing traits and who doesn't, and if they don't, can they learn it and become one?
Yeah. Great question. So I've always been, and this is what got me into coaching in the first place, is what are those unique differentiators that some people have that allow them to go from that high potential to that elite level of performance. And so over the course of my career, I was able to identify, formulas along the way of saying, okay, this person has some of that. This person's a high performer. That person's a high performer. This one's not. And it always comes down to a couple key factors, Jeff. And one, it starts with the belief that they have in themselves.
Yeah.
And that's where the starting point is. And the second part is what kind of mindset do they have? Right? Around a number of different things, challenges, criticism, feedback, right? Growth. And so I think those are the two things that jump out at me immediately is strong conviction in their beliefs and a growth oriented mindset, that allows them. But that's just the starting point. Now,
Yeah.
can anybody become a high performer? Well, as a coach, I believe they can, because a lot of the things that we're missing are skills.
Mm.
Everything in life I look at, and it depends on your viewpoint. Again, it goes back to mindset. My mindset is 99% of the things that in life are skills that can be developed. Now, Jeff, I think I'm 6'4", 225 pounds, or at least I look like some of the football players I coach, but I don't, right? I'm not 6'4". I can't control those things. But everything else is a skill that can be developed
Yeah.
and cultivated.
Right. So, this might sound kind of crazy, but when it comes to the high performer, do you think their surroundings has a lot to do with it too? Like if there's a bunch of naysayers hanging around them and like you can't do that or you're no good at that or you shouldn't be doing that, do they start to like does that just like do they absorb that? Or if they're in a group of people where you're awesome, you can do it, keep pushing, keep grinding, keep going, we're going to help you. If someone's waffling one way or the other, will that environment affect them?
Definitely the environment affects them. But I'll say this: you've seen people that are surrounded by the right environment, and until you believe it yourself, see,
Hmm.
we seek validation from others too often. Validation has to come from within. The belief has to come from within. And I'll share a story with you. When I was at the University of Maryland, after those 6 months of volunteering, stuffing those envelopes, the assistant head coach called a meeting for me. And I thought, here's my shot. Here's
Yeah.
my opportunity. And I walked into that office and I thought, okay, here's a growth opportunity for me. I'm going to advance. And he said to me, Jamie, you want to coach football, right? And I said, yes, sir. And he said to me, well, I'm going to do you a favor today. And Jeff, my heart got big. I was like, here it comes. He said, you're never going to coach college football. I'm doing you a favor. You're
And you
never going
put
to
that in
coach
your
pro
book.
football.
That's in your book.
Exactly. And he says, you should go down the hallway into the athletic department because you're better suited for that. Now, that
Mm.
was a defining moment for me because I could have listened to that voice.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference. Environment definitely plays a role. It's the voice that you listen to that really dictates and determines whether you're going to have success, whether you're going to elevate to the next level, or you're going to listen to those limiting beliefs that others impose on you.
Mm. You talk about neuroscience,
Mm-hmm.
right? In the book, and then you have the crush it formula. Yeah, you have the ice, right? The ice framework. How
Mm-hmm.
does neuroscience kind of intertwine in all of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think a lot of us don't understand how our brain works. And you have to understand how our brain works and the subconscious patterns that we repeat in order to know how to rewire it. And it starts by deleting limiting beliefs. And here's what I mean by that, Jeff. Our identity is given to us. It's really crafted in the first 7 years of our life. Yeah, some
Right,
people say 10. Research says some people, some researchers say up to 10 years. But see, we don't choose that identity.
right.
It's handed to us.
Yeah.
For me, I was born in Mexico and I grew up in a very, tough household. It was like sit with your arms crossed, don't talk, don't say anything. Everything is yes sir, no ma'am. And so it wasn't until I began to craft my own identity, and that took years, that I began to rewire how my brain works, because these limiting beliefs and understanding how we change the neural pathways to create different responses. We all get triggered by certain things. And some people go, I don't understand why I get so upset so quickly, or why I get nervous so quickly speaking in front of people, or why I struggle with, I get so mad at myself. Well, it all starts with limiting beliefs and our identity, and then it proceeds to how we talk to ourselves. But here's what
Mm.
people don't understand: that subconscious programming is running 24/7. And so if you tell yourself, I'm not good enough, I'll never coach football, you know, I'm going to fail, I don't know why all this happens to me, whatever the negative self talk is, that's
Yeah.
what's repeating. So we have to be able to develop and change not only that self talk, but those subconscious patterns to really, really create the identity and the mindsets that we need to be able to
Yeah.
elevate to that next level.
So you're a young college guy, grad,
Mhm,
right? Who's trying to make it into the college football world. You got a college coach that says basically says you're no good, you can't be a coach.
mhm.
And then you go from there to winning the Grey Cup in the CFL. Like how did that happen? You know, that's a major from you're no good, you shouldn't be doing this to winning the Super Bowl in the CFL.
Yeah, I walked out of that office with a chip on my shoulder. But there's a and every step along the way, I said, "I'm gonna prove to that guy and to myself that I belong." Now, there's a downside to that, Jeff. See, I spent the next number of years trying to prove that I belonged,
Mm.
and that showed up
So
and
that could be
where
good or bad.
could be good and it could be bad, right? If my identity was I have to prove that I belong, I have to prove that I'm good enough. I have to prove okay, those things are helpful. But at some point,
You got to believe you belong.
exactly. And you got
Yeah.
to step into that role. And here's where I failed. When I took one of only 41 positions in the world as a head coach of the Edmonton Elks, I remember walking around with the general manager, and he says, "How does it feel to be head coach?" He was a good friend of mine. We had worked together in Ottawa, won a championship in Ottawa together, and I said to him, I feel like I'm just one of the guys still.
Yeah.
See, my identity was still tied to trying to belong. I was still in that Maryland office years back,
Yeah.
as opposed to embracing that position. Man, I'm one of only 41 in the world, and there's a lot of responsibility on my plate. That was one of the reasons. There's a lot of reasons that people fail, and there's a lot of reasons that didn't
Yeah.
go well for me in Edmonton, but that was one of them.
Right. Mm. So XFL, NFL, CFL, how did all of that 25 years or so, give or take, right?
Yeah, something
Right.
like that. Maybe a little less, but sure.
How did all of that shape your leadership identity, your leadership philosophy when you transitioned into the business you have now?
Yeah, I think one of the things that really stands out to me is, when you think about my own leadership philosophy, it started by really understanding that it comes down to trusting and empowering the people around you.
Mm.
And that's what good coaches do. That's what really good football coaches do. Is yeah, I always looked at it this way. The players are the ones playing the game. They're the ones on the field. They see things differently than I do. Right? I'm looking at it from as a play caller because I was a play
Yep.
caller for most of my career. I'm looking at it through a different lens.
Yep.
Right. But that's number one is your ability to trust and empower others. And I'll tell you, I didn't always do that to the best of my ability with other coaches. Right. But that's the first part. The second part, in terms of my leadership philosophy, was you have to be willing to make hard decisions. And I had
Mm.
to make some really hard ones. I had to cut some players that were really close to me that I believed in, but had done some things that hurt the team. And I think as a leader, you have to embrace the discomfort of those hard situations and conversations. And that's always a challenge. But the last
Ugh.
part of leadership, and I think if you've and Jeff, you've been there. If you ever go to a professional football practice, the level of intentionality, and this is what a lot of people outside of football don't understand, the level of intentionality when you step onto that field, the level of intentionality that we would use in game planning, people don't see. Every single moment and every situation is accounted for
Yeah.
in practice and in meetings, and that shaped my leadership philosophy too, as well as having a standard of performance. And I got this from Bill Walsh, and through Mark Trestman, but a standard of performance for how you're gonna operate, how you're gonna live your life, how you're gonna run meetings, how you're gonna coach, how you're gonna teach. There's got to be a standard of performance that you consistently meet and demand of those around you, because that's what good leaders do.
Well, I have to ask you this question because you mentioned their names before.
Hmm.
You said Tom Brady and Drew Brees. I mean, come on, it doesn't get any better, right? What was and because in your book you talk about that, right? You know, you talk about the head coach, now I'm drawing a blank from the
Sean
pit,
Payton.
yeah,
Yeah.
about how he walks into the room and like you said before, there must be standards. right?
Mhm.
So can you talk about how those two quarterbacks set the tone, how Sean Payton set the tone? What did you learn from that? And then you started setting the tone of expectation and standard. How did all that transition?
Yeah, it's so when I started with the New Orleans Saints, and I was able to see Sean and how he commanded presence, how much confidence he carried in his body, and it bordered on cockiness,
Yeah.
but it was confidence, and he was always aware of everything that was going on, while at the same time knowing exactly what he expected. And I'll tell you this about Sean: he didn't let anything slide.
Mm,
And good leaders, and if we're going to
right.
lead ourselves, I think it starts with this.
Yep.
If you're going to tell that person or that player in the first row on the opening day of training camp to sit up and take his hat off, you got to be willing to do that every single day for the rest of the season. So Sean's consistency in his messaging was awesome.
Mm.
But man, Jeff, when I tell you he walked into a room, it just and you got to think there's 120, alpha males sitting in a
Oh yeah.
room in an auditorium, and it's loud, and it's
And
and
he's not a big guy either, right?
he's not a big guy, but he carries himself bigger
Yeah.
than he is. When other coaches would come into the room, they would have to say, "Okay, fellas, lock it in, quiet
Yeah.
down, let's get started." Sean would walk in, and the room would just go silent. The head
Now,
guys.
how do you think that starts? I mean, it can't be like day one, you're a coach, you walk in, and everybody follows that. Was there something he did when he was a new coach that kind of grew?
Yeah, I think it, with any great leader and any great coach and any great high performer, it starts with discipline. And that's the first part. But then and I'll tell you some of the traits that I look at and I saw in him: discipline, ruthless consistency.
Mm,
And I think that we are all more inconsistent than we think, right? And
I
so
love that.
the third thing I think is that you could feel this with him. There was a commitment to a higher vision. He was able to translate the vision of where they were going, and I think that's key in leadership, is to be able to paint a picture for the people and say, this is where we're going, follow me, right? And then
Mm,
you could sense that belief, and you saw this in the Saints early on when he took over. Because he believed in himself,
right.
players started to believe in themselves and the team. That confidence carries over, right? And
Yeah.
you could see that desire to be great. And I'll tell you what, Drew Brees had that same kind of command. One thing about Drew that I think is really, really important is when you were around Drew, he made you feel like the most important person in the world.
Mm,
And that's a gift, because that goes back to what and how I applied that in my leadership: empowering others, making people feel valued, heard, that they're the most important thing in that moment to that person. And that's a rare gift of the best leaders.
well, and many guys at that level, they want it all to be all about them.
Yeah.
Right? And you find very few guys who are willing to put it, give really to give the attention, to give the empowerment, to give the leadership to other people,
Yeah.
and whew,
And and when I saw Drew, and when I say Drew was special, he would do that with the cafeteria lady, with the gentleman that
yeah,
picked up the trash. He'd do that with me, with Sean. I mean, and so I think how you treat people
yeah,
along your journey is just as important as a leader.
right. So how intense was Brady?
Ah, I absolutely loved being in that meeting room with Brady, because I mean, so I'll share the story with you. It's training camp 2013, I believe, and it's fan night in training camp. So Gillette Stadium is lit up. There's 45,000 people, and there's kids all over the place. And Tom walks out there, and he doesn't care he is MFing receivers up and down the field. That was an 11-yard route. Run it at 12, right? And he demanded excellence out of everybody.
Mm,
And I think and it didn't matter who it was, and it didn't matter where it was or when it was, he was going to demand excellence. And you talk
Yeah.
about most of those players on that field with fan night, they're focused on the fans, they're a little
Yeah.
distracted. His ability to zero in on what he was doing in that moment and every
Mm.
moment was amazing to see. And I think that's such a rare gift and just one of the many things that makes him great.
Yeah. I mean, very few people get the chance to coach one guy like that, let alone two,
Yeah.
and then that's awesome.
And I'll share this story with you because I
Sure.
think it's relevant. So I'm in the offensive meeting rooms now. I got a ton of access. I was a guest coach, but you have to understand the Patriots complex is a little bit like Fort Knox. So they gave me my own office. I got to watch all the video. I got to be in the meetings. But if I had to use the restroom, I had to call somebody to escort me through the building. Right?
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And so we're in an offensive meeting and the front door opens. I'm in the back of the room at the back of the auditorium, way up top, and I'm sitting next to Irving Fryers, the running backs coach, and Dante Scarnecchia, the offensive line coach, who's a legend in terms of offensive line coaches.
Yeah.
And the meeting stops. And the guy in front of the room points to the back of the room and points up and then signals to go to the left. And so now the room turns around. Brady's looking back at us. Everybody, Josh McDaniels is looking. The guy points again, back of the room, and says, "You go." And I don't know who he's pointing to.
Yeah.
So Dante taps me on the leg and he says, "I think he's pointing at you." And I think to myself, "Oh man, what did I do? I'm getting kicked out of the Patriots complex,
Yeah.
right? I got into the wrong film. I did something wrong."
Yeah.
And so now the whole meeting, it is going on, and Tom stands up and he's like, "What the heck? What the heck?" And so I get up and I leave the room and I'm like, and you know what it was? Robert Kraft wanted to spend 15 minutes with me. So
Really?
he got me out of the meeting to go spend 15 minutes with him. Make a long story short, is one of his grandsons was interested in going to the school I was coaching at the time.
Yeah.
But that level of intensity, that gaze that
Yeah.
Tom gave me, like you are interrupting a meeting, it was
Oh
pretty
my God.
intense. It was
Wow,
pretty intense.
that's cool. So let's talk about some setbacks. There's
Mhm.
been a couple, right,
Mhm.
along the way. Is there any one or two that really stand out that one was very difficult to deal with, or two, what you learned so much from it, it just made you a better person, a better coach, better father, better whatever. Does anything stand out?
Yeah, there's two of them, right? And really two. The first one I mentioned earlier, right? Getting not having success at Edmonton. I think that was hard for me after the fact because you work so hard to put yourself in a position to earn that opportunity, right? And to not fully be able to capitalize on it because of the time component that was given to you. That was really hard. There were so many other factors. It was a COVID year. But
Yeah.
you know what? You know what I learned from that? I was responsible for everything. And
Mm.
we've all heard the concept of extreme ownership.
Yeah.
Everything that happened on that football field, I was responsible for. And so, although there were external factors, there always will be external factors. That was a major setback for me, and it took me some time. And as you read in the book, to come out of that because
Yeah.
it felt like all this work that you had culminated in this opportunity, and it was gone. There was another time though, Jeff, that I worked for a really look. There's demanding coaches.
Yeah.
Right? Doug Marone was one of the hardest coaches I ever worked for, but he made me better. Right? And you're in those meeting rooms, and it is intense. It's a heated environment. In football, it's different because there's only 12 games. In
Yeah.
college at the time, there's only 17 games now in the NFL. So every win and every loss is magnified.
Yeah.
And no disrespect to baseball or basketball, there's just more games,
Yeah.
right? Or hockey. And so the level of intensity is higher. But Doug wasn't one of them, but I worked for another coach who was really narcissistic, tough environment. And here's what you learn through those situations. You find out how much resilience you truly have.
Mm.
And to be honest, you find out more through those challenging environments where it's heated, where nobody really, where there's contradictions, right? Where there's conflict and unnecessary conflict. You find out more about yourself and your values and your own
Yeah.
levels of resilience. And so there was a couple. I don't want to get too far into the details on those
Yeah.
for sake of protecting certain people,
Sure.
but I do know this. They were key moments for me in determining where I wanted to go next.
That's great.
Yeah, and what you're willing to tolerate. I think that's important, right? Because we're all going to be challenged, but one of the things I'm a big believer in is surrounding yourself with team. You talked about environment, a team around you, people that are going to empower you. And in football, very much like some other professions,
Yeah.
it's alpha male driven,
Yeah.
and you've got to have that alpha male type confidence to succeed.
Right. So as a head coach,
Hmm.
I want to, you just said it before, it's what are you willing to tolerate?
Hmm.
As a head coach, what were you, if you, can you name two or three things that you just weren't willing to tolerate? These are just, forget it. It's not happening here.
Yeah, great question. So number one, we weren't going to be disrespectful to the women in the environment. Just was not going to happen.
Love it.
Right. And if you did, and then the second thing that we didn't tolerate is if you were going to lie about your physical condition, and I don't mean in a way like I'm okay, coach, there's toughness.
Yeah.
I mean if you were going to put yourself above the team when it related to your health, your head, your concussions, we were not going to tolerate that. Because now we're really messing with people's lives.
Sure.
And so those two things, there were a couple others. Right? We weren't going to, football is a game where it's intense, where we're going to get into arguments. We're going to see the game differently. That's okay. We're going to disagree.
Yeah.
Right. But those were two. The other one that I was not going to tolerate is guys being late.
Mm.
And here's why. And people don't understand why that's so important. But really, what you're saying when you're late to a Zoom, when you're late to a meeting, when you walk in 30, is my time is more important than yours. And
Mm.
so for us, that was not, if you were late, you missed the meeting.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to the standards.
Sure.
Right? And now, as I work with companies, we talk about culture. Well, culture is not just on values, it's the behaviors that we want to embody. Right? And
Yeah.
and cult it values. I can say, hey, we value communication. What does that look like in action? Hey, we value respect. Okay, what does that look like in action?
Yeah.
Right? And I think that that's one of the things with companies now. I spend a lot of time is saying, let's put that in a behavior,
Yeah.
because behavior reflects is
Yeah.
a
Behavior
product of the
reflects the
culture.
culture. So culture, you hear that all the time.
Yeah.
What's the culture of the locker room? What's the culture of the office environment? What's the culture of the team? And sometimes people say, well, how do you describe culture? How do you define it? Like if as a leader, as a head coach, as a
Mhm.
position coach, now as a business coach, right? Like, how do you start that conversation?
Yeah. It starts by the feeling. When
Yeah.
you walk into a place, when you come onto the practice field, if you're a guest, it's that feeling you get. Right? Culture is felt. It's hard to describe.
Yeah.
And in fact, culture is something that you are working on as a company, as a team, as as a leader every single day, because the culture changes every single day. I know that sounds extreme,
Right.
but as soon as in football, as soon as one person was cut and we brought another person on, that culture changed. So culture is something that embodies who you are.
Yeah.
Do you pick up the trash that's on the floor? All right, as a player.
Yeah.
Do you take your tape off and throw it on the floor, or do you throw it in the wastebasket? What does that culture feel like, whether it's at a place of employment, at Google, at whatever place it might be? But it's something that's felt. That's first and foremost.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think that culture is one of those things that you need the people to tell you what that is. There's no plaque that you put on the wall. It's what people say about the company. It's what people say about you as the leader. in a
No.
fully unadulterated kind of conversation.
So it's just like Drew Brees, where he just makes everybody feel great,
Exactly.
from the janitor to the president of the company and everybody in between. He doesn't differentiate. He just makes them all feel great.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that's an environment that you create. And pro football has that level of intensity. You're always going to have that level of intensity,
Yeah.
but it's what you feel when you walked into the New England Patriots, you felt different.
Yeah.
It was more stern. I don't want to say colder, but it was more stern. It was more serious
Yeah.
in terms of what you felt.
Right.
It felt more like Fort Knox. But that's the way Coach Belichick wanted to run that.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have to, as leaders, be true to how we want to run things. I've
Yeah.
been in other environments. I was blessed enough to spend time with Bruce Arians, and that's a very different culture.
Yeah.
And eh, it's reflective of what your leadership style is. And I think too many of us aren't tapped into what our leadership style is and why we value it.
Yeah.
Um, I will say this about culture, and I'm a big believer in that. I made this mistake earlier. We can say, "Hey, we're family here."
Yeah.
You got to be careful with that word
Right.
because you don't fire family. You don't cut family, right? And so
Yeah.
I always try to, well, not always. I used family for a while, but it's team. It's that sense of we're a team here, a true
Right.
team, and I think
Right.
that's important because sometimes you've been in places where or on teams yourself where it doesn't quite feel like a team.
Oh yeah. A lot of dissension,
Yeah,
going on. So as a head coach, was there a certain way you handled guys like how, there's 50 something guys on the team. There's every now and then you get that one guy just like, man, he just messing up the locker room. He's messing up everything. How do you deal with a guy like that? Who, let's say
yeah,
his skill level is really good. He's a starter. He's making big money. Like, how do you handle that?
yeah. You know what? It's a great question, and I had that exact situation in Edmonton. We had a player who was unbelievably talented, but yet the things that we asked him to do, he wasn't doing. For example, everybody kept a clean locker room, and yet you'd walk by his locker and there was stuff all over around his locker on the floor. And in fact,
Mm,
players were in a meeting and the equipment guy is down there and he sends me a picture. And there's his playbook. Now we're in meetings where you should have your playbooks, and his playbook is on the floor with socks and underwear and everything, and everybody else is acquiescing to the rule, like to the culture.
yeah.
So I had to cut him, and I
Oh,
cut him because I think as a leader, sometimes you have to make a decision of what standards you're willing to take and not. And here's one thing that we always have to remember in leadership: how you deal with your most difficult employee is being watched by your best employees,
wow.
and they're
That's big.
watching you to see how you handle that. And that, and listen, I made some mistakes along the way, but that was one of the ones that I felt really convicted about. And we gave him plenty of opportunities. But sometimes you have to make those decisions. Cutting him made us a worse
Yeah.
team, but it was the right decision.
So in the professional football ranks, you got the owners. And
Hmm.
there's certain owners who are just way too involved, right? You know what I
Hmm.
mean? So how does an owner handle that? You're cutting the best guy on the team or one of the best guys who's probably making the most money, and he's still getting paid if you cut him or not, right? So he's
Hmm.
got certain guarantees. How does the owner handle that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So depends on the structure, right? And what I mean by that is, I'm sure there's some teams that very much the owner's involved in every decision, and there are some teams where it's like, general manager, you hired him, if the head coach has final decision on the roster, the general manager has a final decision on who's on the team, and it just depends, right? And I think it's alignment. But we were community owned. We were very much like the Packers. We were the only
Okay.
community owned team at that time in the Canadian Football League.
Okay.
But I think it just depends on the unique structure, and you have to find out what that is. And then you and the general manager have to figure out
You have
how
to
we're going
work
to
it out.
operate. Yeah, who's
Right.
got final decisions because um, in Edmonton, the general manager had the final decision on who stayed on the team. I had the final decision on the game day roster. but we had agreed to that beforehand. In this situation, we were aligned.
That's great.
Yeah.
And that's got to make you feel good as a
It
coach.
doesn't make you feel good releasing somebody.
No, but when the team's behind you with your
Yes,
decision,
absolutely.
yeah, I don't think any time you got to cut someone. They got a family, they got
That's
everything
right.
going on, and they got to go home and deal with it. And even though it's hard.
That's the hardest thing about coaching pro football
Yeah,
is making those decisions, and sometimes those decisions had to be made for reasons that were, you might have to cut somebody just because you didn't have the roster space,
yeah,
even though you liked the guy and he did everything right. And so those are tough, and I never took those decisions lightly. They were
yeah,
tough to handle.
yeah. And now all that's coming down into the college world with the
Yeah.
roster limitations and the money, and it's crazy.
Yeah, it
You
really
know,
is. The college game has changed so much, and so many coaches now say, it's so much easier to coach in pro football, than it is college football nowadays. But I give credit to all those coaches
yeah.
that still do it. You know,
So you think they'll ever lure you back?
no, I think I've shifted, and I
Yeah,
really am enjoying what I'm doing.
yeah,
I got a job offer a couple weeks ago to head back up there
yeah,
to the Canadian Football League, but I turned it down. Um, I think the work that I'm doing now and the individuals that I'm trying to impact, and really the mission to impact a lot of people is
yeah.
is really on my heart now.
Right. You
Yeah.
know, you said the mission, yeah, and I think you and I talked about this when we were on the phone a couple of times, or maybe not. But you know, when I'm talking to athletes about their next step in life,
Mm-hmm.
when the game is over, I talk about finding a career that's going to give them the same euphoric feeling as though they were on the field,
Yeah.
you know. And it sounds like you found that same euphoric feeling from coaching college and professionals football in this business now. So can you talk about that? Like what do you enjoy most about this business? What are your highs? What are your euphoric, feelings about the business that you're in now?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, it's hard to replace running onto a football field
Oh
in a
yeah.
stadium of 100 and 3,000 people at Penn State, or
Yeah.
or coaching at Clemson
Yep.
University in Death Valley and hearing that crowd. Those are hard to replace. The way I've structured it, so as you know, Jeff, I'm a keynote speaker, so that's game day for me,
Yeah.
right? That's my chance to really like crank it up and get that high from game day, the preparation, the
Yeah.
excitement, the nervousness. The one-on-one coaching I do with executives or everyday people is like bringing that linebacker in and having a heart to heart. Hey,
Yeah.
what are you struggling with? Hey, listen, we're not aligned here. Like, what do we need to do?
Yeah.
How can we? And then when I work with companies and I get embedded in companies for 6, 9 months at a time, that's building the team.
Yeah.
And so that fulfills that culture piece,
Yeah.
helping shape the culture, helping shape the teamwork, the discipline, the structure, the accountability that we need to really become a high performing team. So that's how I've replaced it.
Yeah.
Um, but I think a lot of it just the joy just comes from seeing, very much like in football,
Yeah.
when people make progress, when you see them break through barriers of things that they couldn't think that they didn't think they could accomplish,
Yeah.
right? That's always been the joy for me in coaching. And
Yeah.
so that's no different now than it was when I was coaching X's and
Right.
O's.
And you can kind of sit back and watch from afar and say, hey, you know what? It's something to do with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a lot of fun. So thinking about that is you're bringing it's all everything's about consistency, right? The
Hmm.
more consistent you are, the better things happen, the more things happen. But how have you coached athletes as well as business professionals to maintain consistency when there's major pressure on the line?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think one of those things. So when we talk about that performance under pressure,
Yeah,
right, and being consistent, I think it starts by understanding the cycle of performance, whether it's performing in front of board of directors or performing on a football field, a basketball court. And there's really four layers to understanding that cycle of performance. One, it starts with your conscious thoughts. What am I thinking about myself? And that leads to unconscious emotions, right? So my self talk creates certain feelings in me, and those feelings are going to affect my physical state. which will impact my execution. So there's four layers: your conscious thoughts, your unconscious emotions, your physical state, and your execution. You can go into what's known as the sewer cycle or the success cycle. And I'll show you how. So those conscious thoughts might show up by saying, oh shit, I'm gonna miss this free throw. That creates nervousness and anxiety. And now your heart rate starts elevating too much. Your physical, your hands get sweaty, your mind starts racing, you start thinking about the future.
Yeah.
So you're not gonna execute. Or you can go into a much more structured success cycle. I got this. Focus on your breath. That creates calmness, confidence. It reduces your heart rate, right? You're more in tune, time slows down, and so your execution is better. So it starts with understanding how that cycle of performance affects, our body. And then
Okay.
it's understanding what happens with your body when there's pressure. Look, your heart rate, your hands get sweaty, you get that feeling in your stomach. We've all had it, right? Your mind starts racing. Understanding that that's your body preparing you for performance.
Yeah.
See,
Mm.
a lot of times in the front of that, when you're going to go in front of the board of directors, you're like, calm down, take a deep breath. Like, why are you so nervous? You're good. Well, you're trying to squash the things that are preparing your body,
Yeah.
the adrenaline that's naturally coming out, it, in preparing you to have an elevated state of mind, right? To be able to take in deeper breaths, whatever the case might be. But so many of us don't understand what our body's trying to do to help us in those pressure moments. So it's understanding what your body does. But I think there's another component here, and that's how many people, Jeff, have you met that have a purposeful plan for nourishing, developing, cultivating their confidence?
Not a lot.
Exactly. And confidence is one of those skills that has to be managed.
Yeah. Oof.
And we do it in sports. We try to manage our confidence. A receiver starts dropping the ball. We've all seen it. A baseball player, can't all of a sudden can't hit, right? So there are ways that you can nourish and develop and cultivate confidence. And I'm huge on this in the mindset piece because confidence is like that gold gem. We've all had it, but how do we keep it? How do we maintain it
Yeah.
through a standard of performance? And then the last thing is, and I learned this a long time ago. This is probably, and this came from Bill Walsh and through Mark Trestman. We have to focus on a process, not on the outcome. Right. And so for you to handle that pressure, it's what's my process? What's my routine? What's my structure here? So many of us focus on the outcome, the result. Am I going to close the deal? Am I going to win the sale? Right? Am I going to make this free throw? We're going to win this game.
Yeah.
You have no control over that. I
Mm.
called so many great games, Jeff,
Yeah.
where we lost.
Yeah.
I called the perfect play in the right situation, and it went for a -2 yard gain. And there were
Yeah.
times where I called the most worst play possible, but the players made it right.
Yeah.
Focusing on your process rather than the outcome.
That's great. Well, what you just said, confidence has to be managed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you literally brought me back to 1983
Okay.
instantly, right? And do you know the name John Skladany?
I do.
Okay.
Yep.
He recruited me out of high school,
Okay.
and he was my position coach up at University of Maine.
Okay.
So here I am. It's August 1983. I'm scared to death. Not telling anybody, but I'm up
Okay.
there like a little kid among with all these men. And we had a defensive back drill, and he's throwing the ball to me, and I'm dropping everyone.
Yeah.
And I got to the point where I'm like, don't throw it to me.
Yep.
And I'm just thoroughly embarrassed that for some reason, it's just whatever. He stops everything. And he goes, come here. And I walk over to him. He puts his arm around me
Mm-hmm.
and he gets he's like right here in my ear hole. And he's like, listen, I know you can catch.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry about it. Stop thinking about it and just go out there and play.
Yep.
It was Jamie it was August 13th, 14th, 1983. It
Yeah.
seems like yesterday. I'll never forget that. And when he told me that, I felt like $1 million.
Yeah. I love that story,
Yeah.
Jeff, because see that memory. is probably one of your, I would say, goes in what I call your top 10 memories. You want to
Yeah.
cultivate confidence?
Yeah.
We all have those top 10 memories. Oh, I remember when I graduated law school. Oh, I remember when I won the Grey Cup,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so, one of the ways we cultivate confidence is creating a highlight reel
Yeah.
of our best memories,
Mm,
right? And playing those memories over and over in those moments before the big games because they
yeah.
create feelings. We talked about feelings a minute ago and the unconscious emotions,
Yeah.
right? And I have athletes not only create their own their best memories, but then I put music to it. Create your own highlight reel with
I love
music
that.
and how you felt. And see, now we start cultivating confidence, right? We
Yeah.
start nourishing it. And now people ask me all the time, well, what do you do with the bad memories?
You
Hey,
squash them.
you do, so Tony Gwynn developed this, and this was
Okay.
awesome. He made a list of three categories, all the best at bats that he had: bases loaded, hit a single, a home run to win the game. He made a second column of all the great decisions that he made, not
Mm,
to swing at a pitch, to walk, to, you know, whatever those case. And then he made a third column of all the strikeouts and bad decisions that he made and times that he left bases loaded, and he deleted them. Or he reframed the ones that he couldn't delete and
now, how
created.
would he decipher the two?
Yeah, so sometimes you have that memory that of probably look, okay, that memory you just shared with me of
Yeah.
dropping the ball and dropping the ball and dropping the ball. Well, you reframed it.
Yeah.
It now became a positive as you told me the story.
Yeah.
It was that moment of confidence. See, you actually reframed a very negative one when he came over and said to you. So that memory still exists, but it's now a useful memory for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't tap into that, but our
Mm,
subconscious is still playing in the background. You're going to drop the ball. Remember all those times you
yeah.
dropped the ball? Hey,
Yeah.
Jeff, game's on the line. Don't drop this
Yep.
ball. Right. And
Yeah.
so um, there's a purposeful method for how we do that. But I think how we nourish that confidence is really important.
So you kind of just said it, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Is people they want to get from a certain level to elite performance?
Hmm.
What do you see as a professional football coach and a professional business coach? What do you see as the biggest mental barriers most people face when it comes to trying to go from good to elite?
Yeah. Great question. Limiting beliefs. See, the ones I always describe it this way: high performers, the difference between the elite and the ones that have the potential, it's not that the elite have any fewer fears or fewer doubts or that they don't have the occasional negative, thought. They just see those things coming earlier and they work through them faster. Whereas everybody else down here gets stuck in those beliefs. And so I think our ability to break through those limiting beliefs is a starting point. Develop and sometimes that means also developing a belief that is strong enough in ourselves,
Yeah.
right, to really activate all of our potential and to take the type of action that we need that's going to yield the results that we want. That's number one. You got to break through the limiting beliefs. Number
Hmm.
two, I think you got to master your self talk. Too many of us listen to ourselves rather than talking to ourselves. So you got to learn to talk to yourself rather than listening to your thoughts. Because your thoughts are going to
But
tell you you
how do
can't.
you turn that off? How do you do that?
Yeah, great question. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a lot of different tools, but I'll give you an example of two. Look, we all have that little guy, right, on our
Oh yeah.
shoulder who says you can't.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to name that dude. So,
Mm,
and I'll
love
share
that.
how powerful this can be. And it's an easy tool, but you know, for me in fifth grade, there was that guy that wanted to fight me. He just wanted to fight me. So, and he would look. He was bigger than me. I knew I was going to be in a battle, but I had to fight him. And he got a punch in. I got a punch in. Make a long story short, the fight got broken up. But ever since then, he respected me. But my sister told me, you got to name that doubt. When you have those doubts, name them. And I
Mm,
said, oh, it's Danny the doubter. And because this guy in fifth grade was named Danny.
mm,
And Danny kept showing up, right? And I started to talk to Danny, not to, hey, Danny, I appreciate you coming around, not today.
yeah,
You know, try tomorrow, but not today. Right?
yeah,
That's number one. But there's another part that goes deeper. And, you take Beyonce as an example. She developed a complete alter ego, which is a different side to accessing what you have inside you. See, when Beyonce, who was a Christian singer, first started getting famous, she didn't take this, she was uncomfortable with all those suggestive dance moves and the short, skimpy outfits.
yep.
And so she couldn't take the stage as Beyonce. So she took the stage as Sasha Fierce. That was her alter ego. In fact, Jeff, she took that stage for like 8, 9 years until Beyonce could finally step on that stage. So some of us have to develop an alter ego, a side to us that allows us to step into a different part of our personality.
Mm,
And look, that's one of two of several different tools that we employ or that I employ. But I think it's you have to learn to master that self-talk because we don't choose negative thoughts. They just show
yeah,
up.
they just pop in.
It's not like you're at a buffet and saying, "Hey, I'll choose that negative thought, thank you, and I'll choose that one, thank you very much." Right?
Mm.
So, sometimes they just pop up. But I think
Yeah,
part of that is also recognizing it,
yeah,
recognizing, okay, because some of us don't catch it early enough, and then we spiral.
right. And some people, I know this might sound crazy, but you tell me if I'm accurate. Some people just almost like to wallow in it.
Oh,
You know what I
I
mean? Like it's a woe is me, and it's the reasons why they're not making it, and they wallow in it.
you touch a very because I always ask my clients, okay, how is that serving you? And of course, a lot of them say, well, that it's not serving me. And I said, no, it is serving you. It's allowing you to stay in your comfort zone.
Yeah.
It's allowing you to make an excuse for yourself. It's allowing you to justify why things aren't the way you want in life. See, everything we do, if you're truly going to crush it, right? Like we've talked about, it's all a choice. It's a choice about my mindset. It's a choice about breaking through limiting barriers. Look, all of us have had bad stuff happen to us.
Yeah.
The people that choose to, and look, I don't mean to diminish anybody. Some people have harder things than others, but we all get the choice to how we want to respond.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, yes, those thoughts kind of hold us and anchor us in place because it keeps us in our comfort zone.
How, you just said we choose how we respond, right? And some people know they need to stop responding and they
Mm-hmm.
just keep doing it,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And no matter how many times you tell them, how many times you tell them, as a coach,
Mm-hmm.
does there come a time when you say, okay, enough's enough?
Yeah, great question. Absolutely. Because you asked me earlier in the show, how is it that, some people go to elite levels of performance?
Yeah.
For me, I've been blessed to be able to see that guy has it or that girl has a vision for herself. That person can see past their hand. See, so many of us can't see past what's immediately in front of us. And so when you encounter those people that keep hitting that block, and just, I can't see further than the length of my hand, those are the ones that you have to eventually move on from. You can coach them, you can give them every opportunity, but at some point, they've got to go do it themselves.
Mm,
Right? The ones that can see past the immediate. If you're a young financial advisor getting into, the financial world, that you're going to see past the first few rejections that you get, past the first few difficult months because you have a vision.
yeah.
And anybody that has a vision, right, those are the ones that I'm going to bet on. And
Mm,
sometimes we have to craft that vision for ourselves. And then we need to visualize. And this is another trait of high performers is the art of visualization. When we're kids, we
yeah.
dream. We're Superman, we're Batman, we're Wonder Woman. And then we stop visualizing.
That's in your book too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And power of visualization is huge.
Mm. So your book, I
Yeah.
read it. It's excellent. I
Thank
mean,
you, Jeff.
I couldn't put it down. I talk about it all the time. I keep it here on my desk. When the team that I'm building, I share with them the book. I talk about you coming in and to working with the team. What was the inspiration behind this?
Yeah. Great question. So, because as we talked about earlier, look, 50% of the teams win and 50% of the teams lose every week. We
Yeah,
forget that. So,
yeah,
if you're always going to measure success by wins and losses, you're going to be some difficult years.
yeah,
So, this notion became okay, what is, and it started on an interview, and I don't want to give, go down the rabbit hole too much, but what does crush it look like? We've all heard that term. Hey, Jeff, you're going to crush it. Oh, I've got an interview. Oh, Jamie, you're going to crush it. So I started to say, okay, how can we use this as a framework to measure success outside of wins and losses, outside of profit and loss, outside of how much money we make? And what are the key factors that if you're doing these things, there's no way you're not crushing it? There's no way you're not having success. And so the book, as you already know, is filled. Look, if you're living with courage, if you're resilient, if you're have an unstoppable mindset and identity, if you're showing up in a certain way and you're developing habits, you have internal discipline and you have tenacity. That's the framework. If you're doing those things, there's no way you're not crushing it.
right.
But I'll share this with you because somebody asked me this a couple weeks ago. What is crush it? Well, it's not something you do. It's a way of living.
Mm,
It's just oh, I'm going to crush this interview. No, it's not. It's not a frame. It is a framework, but it's a way of living,
yeah,
not just something that you do as an event or on a game or in on a keynote, whatever it might be.
yeah. So what advice can you give to um let's just say the guy coming out of the professional ranks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who says, okay, what's next? What's next for me in the world that, these guys are coming out at 22 to 30 on average or something like that. Football's over. They got to get on to the next chapter in their lives. Do you coach guys about that? Do you give them advice and what kind of thoughts are out there?
Yeah, I think the first thing is being in tune to what to your energy, and here's what I mean by that. I think so many of us look in our conversation. Your energy went up when you took me back to that memory, right? Okay,
Yeah,
so when you talk about the next step and you yourself are talking about it, do you feel energized? Tap into your own emotional, mental, and physical energy. And man, I'm starting to talk about football. I get excited. I'm talking about coaching people.
yeah,
I get excited. I'm thinking about, being a pharmaceutical salesman and well, it's a good job. And, notice your energy drop. And,
yeah.
you know,
That's
so
a
I think
great
that's
point.
number one. Find out what, and sometimes, because sometimes we get lost in what's my purpose? What's the next step? Those are harder things. Just tap into your own energy.
Yeah,
Okay. Number two, leverage your strengths. What are you good at? What do you like to? I love talking to people. Okay. Because there are some jobs that coaching football is a great job. It's a tough career,
yeah.
right? But there are other places where they're great careers, but they're tough jobs. And so, what do you like to do every day? Think about
Mm,
what you're going to be doing on a daily basis, and does that excite you?
right.
Sometimes the things that you're doing on a daily basis, the job may look great, but oh, I'm
Yeah,
going to be doing this or this or this. For me, that came up in differentiating between college coaching and professional coaching. So for me, Jeff, in college coaching, there's a recruiting cycle, as you know.
yeah,
But I found I didn't want to be in the car driving 3 hours to pick up a transcript on a kid. I
yeah.
wanted to focus on my craft.
Right.
I didn't want to spend that time driving from school to school. I want to be talking football and X's and O's. So find out what the day to day
Yeah.
job looks like.
So it's like almost like I said before, finding that euphoric feeling like when you're on the field,
Yeah.
and go find it in your career.
Yeah.
you
And then
know?
the last thing I'd say is be adaptable and flexible.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you may not know what you want, but be flexible, be curious.
That's a
And
big one. It's curious.
yeah,
Some people have they have limited beliefs in their ability, but they limit themselves on being curious and what else is out there. They feel like they're in this, like their identity says I can only do this,
yeah, that's right.
and they're not willing to go outside the lines,
That's right.
you
You
know?
just had the key word. Their identity says
Yeah.
that. And so, you know, as you come out, explore. Nothing I think sometimes we tend to look at things as permanent.
Yeah.
And so, you know, part of our choices in life are crafting and doing and find out crafting and doing the things that not only excite us, but where you want to have impact.
Yeah.
You want to have impact with kids? Do you want to have impact with in the financial world? Do you want to have impact in, you know, in technology? Where do you want to have your impact?
And that's hard for some people to figure out,
That's right.
you know? But let me ask you this question. You were around sports for a majority of your life, and
Mm-hmm.
you weren't just around the typical average player. You've been around elite, best in the world athletes.
Mm-hmm.
But sooner or later, Father Time tells us all it's over,
Yeah.
right? Even Tom Brady had to give it up,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that identity shift for some guys and girls, for whatever sport they're into, that is so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And many times the athlete is told you're done and they don't want to be done, but the coaches, the league, the whoever, your skills are gone. How do you coach? How did you, how do you, or how can we coach people on how to handle that end and they can move on?
Yeah, it's a really good question and and a really tough question because when you're used to the stadium, you know, with 100,000 people and people chanting your name and or just being in the arena, let's just say you know, and it comes to an end on a timeline that's not yours most of the time.
Yeah.
That's really hard. But I think it starts before that. As if you're a good coach and you're developing the entire person. This is one of the things that I'm a huge believer in is teaching our young men and women who are in college, who are going on to play pro, who are not going to have alternate game plans.
Mm,
Jeff, I always had two call sheets, one for the starting quarterback and one for the backup
back
quarterback.
up. Yeah.
So I think part of it starts with earlier on knowing that it's going to come to an end and saying, okay, how do I build for that time? But for those that haven't built, I think that's a really hard transition. And I'm going to use a term that isn't isn't really used in sports, but I think you got to give yourself some grace
Yeah.
during that transition period, right? And I think it's and you've got to be really cautious of the behaviors that or the things that you do to replace that high that you get
Yeah.
because that's where as we have all seen so many athletes fail,
Yeah.
right? Because they that 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 noise isn't there, that excitement isn't there, that and so now they need to replace it.
Yeah.
And so that's a really really hard question. And you know, there's I know that there's a lot of coaches that focus on that area in particular. I'm not
Yeah.
super qualified, but I do know that I always challenge players.
Yeah.
Okay, what are you building aside from football?
Yeah.
You're going to have your own company, you're going to go into sales. How are you building your network now?
Yeah.
Because so much of this is based on the people that you know,
Right.
right? And so, hey, go spend some time with those boosters. Hey, go start building your LinkedIn profile. I think so much of it is who
Hmm.
and how we can position ourselves,
Yeah.
right? And so I think it starts with those key components. But that's a tough question, and I know there's
Yeah.
some great people in this space that focus on those things.
Yeah.
You know, But I think it also starts with, there we in the book there's a QR code for the mindset continuum. I don't know if you've looked at it.
Oh yeah.
Right? I
I
think
printed it out.
that's a really good tool
Yep.
to see where you have more of a fixed mindset or more of a growth
Yeah.
mindset, and that's a good tool to start with,
Yeah.
right? Because I think some of us think we're more growth oriented and when we're really fixed,
Really fixed. Right.
and
Yep. You're
so
right.
um, I'm not
So
sure if I
so
answered that question
yeah.
correctly,
Oh yeah.
but I think
Yeah.
that's a tough
Yep.
situation.
So in your book, so I have a two-part question here.
Yeah,
In your book, you talked about calling the plays and how crazy it can get,
yeah,
right? And I thought that was so cool because I'm sitting there when I'm a guy on TV, like I remember in college the signals and I wasn't paying attention to the offense. Who knows what's going on there? And you watch on TV, it's everybody seems so calm, cool, and oh yeah, they're just saying it's okay, good. Here's the play, good. But you describe behind the scenes, like what's going on upstairs with you, the quarterback. Do they hear it? Do they know it? What's is and you got 8 seconds to figure it out,
yeah.
right? So how do you compare that with that's kind of like organized game planned chaos,
Mm-hmm.
right? To you got the crush it formula
Mm-hmm.
and people struggle in certain areas of it. So
Mm-hmm.
how can they take that like their own mental organized chaos into the crush it formula that's similar to game calling plays where it gets kind of nutty, but somehow you figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Awesome question. And if I understand it right, so that organized chaos, it really depends on who you are and what you need to know. So here's what I mean by this. The process of simplifying. If I'm a receiver and I'm hearing this entire formation call, right? There's only certain key things that I'm listening for. If I'm an offensive lineman, I'm listening for something different. If I'm the quarterback, I have to know all of it,
Right.
right? So I think the first thing it starts in simplifying and breaking it down into, in football it was alignment, assignment, right? And that was the starting point. What's my alignment? What's my assignment? Okay, and then what's my adjustment?
Right.
So how you can take that organized chaos, I think it truly starts with simplifying first,
Okay.
right? How do I break it down? And here's why I say this, because again, neuroscience comes into play here. The human brain likes patterns. The most easily recognized pattern is the pattern of three. So that's why we always had, and I never knew this until years ago, where it was like, that's why we have the three musketeers, the three blind mice, stop, drop, and roll, bigger,
Okay.
faster, stronger, right?
All
Because
right.
we would remember those things.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you've ever gotten directions from somebody and you guys, hey, where's the restroom? And they said, oh, okay, or where's this address? Where's this place? And they say, oh, go down the second street, make a left. You're going to see a green house on the right. Don't go there. Continue down. Now there'll be a 7-Eleven on your left-hand side. Okay. Once you see a 7-Eleven, continue down two more streets, and then you're going to make a left. Now you're going to come to a park. You're lost.
Yeah.
But if I say, hey, make a left out of the parking lot, second street, go down, make a right, third street on your left, turn left, and you'll find a red building right there.
Yep.
Ah,
Got it.
so simplifying it.
Yeah.
So even though it's organized chaos on the field that you guys see, everybody's really simplifying it for
Yeah.
themselves. That's step number one,
Okay.
right? Um, and then I think the second component to that is is really focusing on the first action that I can take. So many of us get stuck in thinking. Did he say this? Does he mean that? Does she mean this? But, well, what if I do this? Well, what? Just take action. The ball's
Yeah.
going to be snapped at some point. If we lived like we would on game day, that the ball is going to get snapped and we had to take action, we would all be moving along a lot faster. And
Yeah.
then the third component that I would use occasionally, and I don't think people in business do this enough, call a timeout.
Mm.
How many times a day do you see in football? There's
Yeah.
three timeouts in the first half, three in the second half. How many times in the day, when you look back at your day, you said, "Man, I sure could have used a timeout
Yeah.
right before
A
that meeting,
breather. Take a
right
breather.
before I said those things."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Take a timeout. Take the principles from the sporting world and apply them. And that's actually how ICE was born. So, because we in the halftime of a game, people think, oh, there's all these, there's 14 minutes. It takes you 4 minutes to get down from the press box if you're calling the game upstairs. The players go and they're taking a quick drink, they're talking to themselves, and the coaches come together and they literally have 2 to 3 minutes to make adjustments and about another 2 minutes to present them to the players before they're back out on the field.
Yeah.
So ICE was born out of how do you have a process, again, go back to the process for making adjustments or making decisions, right? And
Mm.
so not and I developed this before the all the challenges that we're facing now with ICE, but ICE stands for identify, create, and execute. Identify the issues. Why is the game plan not working? What are we doing wrong? We're not moving the ball. We're not okay. What are the insights that we've gotten from identifying our problems, and what are the impacts of being wrong? Do I change the game plan? Do we switch the quarterback? Right? Do we start? Okay. What are the impacts of those? Then create concepts for how we're going to move forward, create specific criteria, and create a course of action, and then execute. Who do I need to engage to do this? Do we need to go 12 personnel in football? It's, two tight ends, two receivers, and one back. Do we need to go 21 personnel? Okay. Who do I need to engage? What do we need to enact, and how are we going to evaluate if we're on the right track? So this identify, create, and execute is kind of a plan for
Yeah.
adjustments.
That's awesome. Man, I can sit here and talk to you all night,
I
you
could
know?
too.
Yeah.
This is fun. I'm energized now.
This is
So
fun. So what's next for you? Is there anything like this is the next big challenge for you?
yeah, I love the question. Look, and I'll say this publicly because I think, you know, I believe in challenging myself, and if I put it out there, then I've got to
Yeah.
do it. So, there's two things that are on the horizon. One, I want to speak in front of 20,000 people. I want to get to that point where the message resonates really for on a grander scale. But Crush It was just the beginning because what we're really building out is okay, what does Crush It look like for leaders, and how do we change the acronym? What does Crush It for teams or teammates? How do we crush it? What does Crush It look like for kids
Yeah.
in their mindset? So what I'm really hoping that is that Crush It develops into something that's meaningful on a lot of different levels,
Yeah.
right? And that's where the vision is and the growth. But look, I think at this point, if I can continue to have positive impact on people and help them break through their limiting beliefs and
Yeah.
develop the right mindset and have success, at the end of the day, if that's all I do moving forward, then that'll be a success.
It's
And I
pretty
truly
damn
mean
good.
that. Now
Right.
I am a vision guy. So,
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you that I don't have, bigger visions for where I
Yeah.
want to take this. And there's another book in the works
Oh,
already. So,
cool.
yeah,
Cool.
yeah.
So how do you want to be remembered? I mean, you've done so many cool things, touched so many people's lives, and I would imagine if I were to go to talk to different guys and say, well, tell me about Jamie. Like, what do you remember about this guy? How do you want that narrative to be written?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Again, I'm going to simplify it. I want people to know or be able to say, Jamie was always present. He was always right there. Like when you talk to
Mm,
him, he gave you everything he had right in that moment. Two, you knew that he cared about you. He genuinely cared about you as a person. And I think most importantly, or just as importantly, is that people say after you just felt good being around him. You were
yeah,
uplifted, man. You had a
yeah,
conversation. You just felt empowered and uplifted and kind of inspired is a big word, but you know that's if I do those things,
yeah.
and if more people talk and say those things at the end, then it'll be a life worth having lived.
And it's a win-win,
It's a win-win.
right?
Yeah,
So Jamie, we talked about a ton of stuff.
it was awesome.
We went from college to NFL to CFL to your business to your book. Um, is there anything we haven't talked about or touched on you think we should hit before we wrap it up?
No, I appreciate it. There's a 50-day journey There's a 50-day Crush It program online if anybody's interested, because one of the things I'm a big believer in is driving consistent change. And the way we change our habits is
Yep.
through creating the right behaviors. This
So
has
how
been
can
a
people get a hold of you?
Yeah, great question. So they can go on my website, Jaime Elizondo.com, and that's Jaime. And I'll send you the link. And so they can find me on LinkedIn.
Yep.
Um, those are the two platforms I really use the most. But it has been a pure joy being on here and spending time with you, Jeff. So I really, I humbly, say thank you. Thank you for having me on, and thanks for the time, and thanks for the memories, and especially, I think the best part for me was taking you back to 1983, if I had that right. So
It seems like yesterday,
yeah,
you know. But Jamie, listen, man, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to so everybody to know is Jamie is coming into my firm to make a huge impact here, man. And I can't wait for you to be here.
that's awesome. I can't wait to be there. Thank you, Jeff.